Hey, bro.
All these beautiful faces, I wish I was speaking to you.
You too.
So, I'm going to turn the mic over. Oh, if you have your cell phones on, if you could turn those off, I would appreciate that, as would our guests.
Do not disturb.
I am going to turn the microphone over to Ben, because this event is happening because of Ben and his willingness to share a little bit of his family story with me, and then speaking to his dad about coming to present in front of all of you. And I would especially like to thank the Kreitenbergs for being willing to have such a large audience, because believe it or not, you guys are a little bit intimidating. So, all right, enjoy.
I'm just going to introduce this is my dad, Mitch. He's going to be talking to you guys. This is my Uncle Ernie. This is my Zaidi, also Mike's name. I call him Zaidi. So. Thank you all for coming. This is quite a crowd, quite an audience. I've done this before in classrooms, but never to a group this size. In fact, my father was the one who actually would go out and do the speaking and tell about his life experiences. He did that at my daughter's high schools and junior high schools. They're older than Ben, but he's not able really to tell his story today. So I basically have taken over doing that for him. And but I know it's important to him to let people out there, kids out there, know about what happened to him in his life, so that it doesn't happen again, primarily. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what I'll do is I'll run through. I'll just tell you about his life story. Because he's been videotaped doing this before, we do have some videotape of him telling his story. So we'll mix that in at one point, so you get to see him talk about his life, in a previous time. So, and then what we'll do is, if you have any questions, try to save them for after. Otherwise, we'll never get through it. But save your questions up. We'll answer questions. Myself, my brother, as best we can, which I think hopefully we'll be able to do that. Let me ask you first: who is 17 years old in this room? Raise your hands. Pretty much most of you. If you're not 17, you're 16 or 18, right? Okay. Well, all these events happened in 1944. When these events started happening to my father and his family, he was 17 years old. So, that's always an important thought, I think, to keep in mind. He was Ben's age, basically, when all these events happened. Well, I'll tell you, he was born in a place called Tech, Czechoslovakia. At the time, a few years prior to World War II, it became Hungary. That land was changing hands all the time. It's by a place called the Carpathian Mountains. So at the time of World War II, he was considered Hungarian and was considered a Hungarian Jew at that time. Later, after the war, Russia took over the area. It was behind the Iron Curtain all that time, was Russia. Today it's actually part of the Ukraine. So that's the area of the world where he's from. He lived in a small house in Tech with his father, Chaim, Elia, his mother, Chaya, an older brother, Sam, an older brother, Yitzhak. He's Mike. His name was, he was known as Mendy at that time. And he had a younger brother named Joe, and he had a twin sister named Suri, which is kind of an important fact that they were twins. Fortunately, when they went to the concentration camp Auschwitz, which they went to, nobody ever found out they were twins because they did awful experiments on twins. Fortunately, that didn't happen. The town was about 5,000 people, my dad has told me, probably about 1,200 Jewish people. They had no problems growing up with their friends and neighbors. Even the non-Jews were friendly to Jewish people. They got along real well. It was a different world that you guys grow up and lived in, though. There was no running water, no electricity. Bathrooms were outside, in an outhouse. They'd get heat by gathering and burning wood. And for electricity, they'd light wax and oil and those kind of things. So let alone iPads, computers, iPhones, none of that stuff. Didn't even have a light switch to turn on. That's how they lived. Horse and buggies in the town. There were some cars that came through at the time. But he grew up, normal kid, had fun, loved to play soccer. That was a sport. In fact, they used to have a nickname for him, Yankee the Cronky, like Yankee the goalkeeper. So we all think that's where Ben got his powerful kicking leg from. Very possible. Anyway, let's see. He had a pretty busy day of school. The Jewish families were fairly religious in that area. He'd get up pretty much, his average day, he'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, go to Hebrew school for a couple hours, then go to the public school, and then go to Hebrew school again after that. And that was 6 days a week, every day, pretty much except Saturday. Well, things started to change because of the war. The Hungarians took over for the Czechs. So instead of going to Czech schools, they started going to Hungarian schools. But then in 1942, the Germans took over and they came in. Have most of you studied about the Holocaust at all? Are you familiar with these things in your class? Okay, so maybe you have some familiarity. Has everybody heard of Auschwitz? Does everybody know what that is?
Yes.
Does anybody don't know what it is? Okay, good. That's where my dad ended up spending several months. Anyways, the Germans came in and they started laying down different laws. They put curfews down so the Jewish people were not able to be out in the public street after nightfall. They stopped allowing them to go to the public schools. And as I'm sure you've seen and heard, they had to wear Jewish stars on their clothing. So they had to make their own felt 6-point Jewish stars, and basically they had clip-ons to where they'd attach it to their clothing. And the Germans were pretty harsh to them. They would pick them out to do work for them, to do labor jobs without paying them. And finally, in 1944, in April of 1944, right immediately after the Jewish holiday Passover, which is around the time of Easter, the Germans put the law in and said you had to move out of your homes. You had to take whatever belongings you could, maybe in one bag, and you're all going to be centralized and moved into what they called a ghetto in Tate. So they had to pick up, leave their homes, and go to this ghetto, which was maybe a 4-block by 4-block area where they had all the Jewish people live. It was very crowded, and I'm sure if you've seen Schindler's List or some of the movies that are out there, you've seen what some of these ghettos were like. The Warsaw Ghetto is a famous one, where the people had to live there for quite some time. So basically what they did was his family lived in a barn. There were Jewish homes in the area, and they all just kind of had to group together, live together. So they lived in a barn, basically for about 4 to 6 weeks. They only did that for about a month. Then they were told that they had to leave Tate, that they were going to be moved. And they didn't know where they were going. They'd never heard of Auschwitz. They didn't know what it was. But they were told they were going to leave. They did know rumors and stories that the Germans, the Nazis in particular, were doing evil things to them, killing Jews, burning their homes down, things like that. We didn't see any of that, but this is what they were told when they were going to go get on the trains. So they put them onto boxcars. Not a train like with a seat, open, flat boxcars. They just jammed all the people in, and they took a 24-hour train ride. The only stop they made was at the Hungarian border so that the Hungarian police could come on board and take all their money from them. So, wonderful. That's the only stop that they took. Then, after the 24-hour train ride, they pulled into Auschwitz, the concentration camp that you've all heard of. It's a pretty historic, notorious place. It's estimated that probably 1 million people died there. Not just Jewish people, but political opponents, Polish war prisoners, gay people, anybody that the Germans had no use for, didn't want, they would send to Auschwitz. But the majority of them were Jewish people that were sent there. And the trains used to go in there. I mean, my dad said later from his experience when he was there, just all day long, trains were pulling in thousands and thousands of people all the time. So what happened was when they got there, all their belongings that they had brought in their bag, they left on the train. They never saw it again. So the Nazis, they went through, they took any object that they wanted, gold, anything valuable, they kept, they melted it down. Then what happened was they separated the men from the women, and they approached in two lines, and there was a Dr. Mengele there, a famous figure, doctor who ran the medical aspects of the camp, and he would review all the people when they came by, and he would basically make a decision with the point of his stick. Go left, go right. One direction was that you were going to be put to work in the camp. They thought they had some use for you, and you would go take a shower, get your uniform, and go through what you needed to go through. If you were sent the other way, that was a line to the gas chamber, which also ran pretty much nonstop 24 hours a day and night, from my understanding. You could see the smokestacks, the fire, and the specks of material, I can't think of the word for it, that came out, embers that came out off the fire. So what happened was my father was sent to one side with his father, two brothers, and his sister, and his mother was to go the other way, but the younger sister didn't want to leave her mother. So she wouldn't leave her mother's side, so she went with her mother, and they went off to the side, which was not the good side. So presumably we know what happened with them, and the rest of the family never saw them again after that. So my dad was with, and you didn't know what choices were to be made. You didn't know where you were going to be, who you were going to see the next day or in the future. You didn't understand left, right, where to go or not to go. So unfortunately, choices that were made, oftentimes were life and death decisions that you didn't know were going to evolve that way. So what happened was, then my father and his two brothers were taken into the camp, and they were given a shower. They got uniforms, the striped uniforms that many of you have probably seen in television documentaries and that kind of thing. And they asked for volunteers to do what they said was going to be blacksmith work. So my father's older brother, he volunteered for that along with a friend. He wanted to stick with his friend. He thought it'd be a job that he could do. Nobody knew what that choice meant either. We guessed that maybe he had to work in the crematorium with fire, probably, where they burned the bodies, but we don't know. And sadly, never saw him again either. Never heard from him again. In fact, my brother Ernie is named after him, has his Hebrew name of Yitzhak. So it was, and there was an older brother I mentioned in the beginning. His name was Sam. Sam was a few years older, and he was drafted into the Hungarian army to do work for them. The Jews were like slaves in the army. So he actually did not go to Auschwitz. He actually survived the war. So we'll get back to him at the end. He actually survived, along obviously with my father and his younger brother, Joe. Those were the three brothers that survived. So when they first came into the camp, they were at a place called Birkenau. That's sort of a sister camp. It's about a mile away from Auschwitz. And they were placed there. And they basically, I've been to Auschwitz, I've seen it. They had big, maybe 6 foot by 6 foot slats, wood boards, and they had 12 to 15 Jewish prisoners sleep on those at one time. That was his introduction to the camp. And the Germans would play games with them. They'd come with like a stopwatch, 1 minute to get up and line up, 1 minute to get back in. And they were really very harsh with them. So at that point, they were given their tattoo, and they were sent into Auschwitz, where they were sent to a bunk. Actually, they called them blocks. So my dad was in block 6. And they had 3-tier bunks. They were just single bunks with wood slats. No mattresses, no pillows, none of that good stuff, no heat. And so he was able to share one of these 3-tier bunks with his father and his brother. And I've actually been to Auschwitz. You can take tours there, see a lot of it remains the way it was. And interestingly, blocks 1 through, I think there are about 50 blocks, 50 buildings. It looks like a camp, actually. The first 4 blocks are the museum right now. But I mean, it was really special for me and my dad and my brothers, because basically 2 blocks down from the museum was the block that they were in, you know, and lived in. And it still exists today. And I think now it would be a good time to run it. You can watch a little tape where my dad can explain from here about the tattoo and about his life in the camp. From 37 minutes to like 44 and a half, I'd say, would be good.
Well, we got to Auschwitz,
You don't mean like I slept on when I was at camp with a mattress and a sheet? What
No,
kind of bunks are these?
no, I mean a bunk, just wood, yeah, like, no sheets, no pillows, no anything, really, just wood bunk.
Was there any heat in the bunk?
No, there's no heat. And from there, that's where we got tattooed. And from there we went to that was in Birkenau. From there we walked into Auschwitz.
After you'd been tattooed?
After tattooed, yeah.
How many days had you been there when they put on the tattoo?
Like the second day.
Second day.
Yeah.
And do you remember, what did it feel like when they gave you the tattoo?
What did it feel like? Like you lost your name, you're only a number, That's what you were, number. So,
what number did you become?
I became A10193.
Can you hold that up? Now it's facing me, so if I'm the German, I could read it.
Yes.
Did it take very long to put on?
No, just maybe 30 seconds.
Did they tell you anything about it when they did it?
No, nothing.
Who were you with when you were getting tattooed?
Well, I was with my father and my 2 brothers, Yitzhak and Ernie. Not Ernie, Ernie's my son, I'm sorry, Joe. Yeah. My father's number was A10191, and my brother Joe was A10192, I'm 10193, and my older brother was 10194.
And that's how you were standing in line?
Yes.
Where did they take you next?
From there they took us into Auschwitz, into block 6 was our block. They call it a block. That's like a building. Block 6. Yeah. And we stayed there until we left from there, which was in December, January of 1944.
Now, up to this point, had you started any of the appels or anything that we hear people talk about?
No, we didn't have any appels until we got to Auschwitz. Yeah, that's when we had the appels. Every morning before going out to work, you got up, you had your tea, and you had an appel in the morning, going out, they counted you, reported, and then we went to work, and when you came back in the evening, we had another appel to make sure everybody is accounted for. And then had dinner, whatever.
And was this all the time, every single day?
Every day. Every day.
7 days a week?
7 days a week.
What kind of work did you do?
What we did is they collected, like they collect garbage, and they brought it out to the dump. And our company was sorting out all the trash. Like we separated paper, rags, glass, metals, and separated it and stacked it up in stacks. And after a while, they hauled it away and for recycling. And everything else that was not savable was burned.
Sounds like, was it wet and smelling garbage?
Yes, oh yeah, sure.
And it sounds a little dangerous too. The glass was probably broken a lot.
The whole thing was dangerous, so that was not as dangerous as being there. Yeah. At least if you handle it, you're careful.
What's a piece of glass compared to a tree with a stick?
Yes, right.
Were the Germans very cruel?
Were they cruel? Yes, yes.
In what ways?
Well, if you didn't do your work, they had a stick, like you say, and let you have it. Sure.
And did you get breaks during your work?
No breaks. Lunch break. Half hour for lunch. Which they brought us soup for lunch out there. And we ate in half an hour back to work.
Can you describe the soup?
Well, I don't know what, there was all kinds of, I guess, meats that they feed horses and cattle. They cooked that and gave you something to eat. That's how I can describe it. You can say for sure that I'm eating a carrot or a potato or anything like that. It's just mushed up soup.
Did you have your own bowl? Would you get it in your own bowl?
Yes.
And would they give you this bowl?
Yeah, they gave me the bowl.
And spoons as well?
The spoon, yes.
Bread of any kind?
Bread you used to get in the evening. When you came back into camp, you got some bread, and sometimes with that you got a piece of cheese or a piece of salami for dinner. And that was your daily food.
And then this tea and
Tea
breakfast?
in the morning, yeah, breakfast, yeah.
And that's all you get?
That's it, yeah. That's what you got.
After all the work was done and the counting was finished, about how many hours of sleep would you get?
Well, when you came in to camp, you came back in the evening after work, you cleaned up, of course, and yourself, and you had your piece of bread, whatever you wanted to eat. I mean, that's what you had to eat. And you took care of things that you needed for your own self, maybe sew on a button or fix your...
I hope that was interesting for you to get to hear some of it from his mouth, instead of mine. He did an interview with the Steven Spielberg Foundation probably almost 20 years ago now, where they sat down and interviewed him. And there are hundreds and thousands, I think, Holocaust survivors who were interviewed by that foundation. You can find them, I think, online and in several libraries, Holocaust libraries. I think UCLA, Harvard, Yale, so several of the universities have these interviews accessible in their libraries. Anyway, so that's what it was like when he went into the camp. One thing he did tell me, which he didn't talk about there, was that because of the job that he had, which was actually a pretty good one, he was going through the trash. He was actually able to steal food. He was able to find bits and pieces of thrown away food that he was able to maybe smuggle under his shirt and bring back for his father and his brother and himself to remain maybe a little bit stronger, than some of the average people that were at camp who were just eating the disgusting soup and tea that he talked about. His father, the appel that he talked about in the beginning, that was a lineup. Everybody had their number. They count you to make sure you were there, who went in, who went out. What they also did in these lineups, the Nazis, they would come out and occasionally they would pull people out or take down numbers of people that they thought were no longer useful to them or no longer able to work. Unfortunately, that happened to his father in October of 1944, where they wrote his number down and they came to get him a couple days later, and as in all the other circumstances, never saw him again. So that was really unfortunate because it was only a couple of months before they evacuated the camp and the war was coming to a close. So then it was my father and his younger brother Joe, and as the Russians, I believe it was, were coming from the east towards the camp, the Germans decided that they were going to run away from the camp, so they took all the Jewish inmates and then went on what's called the Death March. If anybody's heard of that. It was basically a walk back towards Germany. My dad said that he basically marched for 24 straight hours. No food, no rest. Elderly, anybody who was sick, people who couldn't keep up, they basically shot them on the side of the road and left them behind. They got to a place called Gleiwitz in Germany, or close to Germany. Then they were put into open boxcars again. Horrible situations with no roof on the boxcars, just open boxcars on the train like cattle would be in. And that train just went for, I think, 3 days back into Germany. Again, no rest, no stop. Well, they did stop, he said, so they could take the dead bodies off the train because people weren't surviving, people were dying. There was no food, there was no water during that time. They got to a place called Nordhausen in Germany, which had a camp. And my dad came out at that point. He thinks he got poisoned by some bad water that he ran over to drink. He got very sick. He was ill. He couldn't get up from the camp. He was basically on the ground. And his brother was taken off to work. And Joe, he said that he thought he'd never see my dad again. But, and my dad, by his own estimation, said he thought he weighed about 40 pounds at that time. But he views it as a miracle. A German officer came up to him and asked him what his name was, and he said Kreitenberg. And for some reason, whether this man felt some mercy or what have you, or my dad always thought it's because he had a German-sounding name. For some reason, he moved him and took him in, laid him down in a bed in a better place, gave him a little bit of food. It's really a miraculous thing that happened. And he was able to stay alive. He would tell you that his battle was just to stay alive at that point. Until the Americans came and liberated the camp in early 1945. And I think the British soldiers were there also because he said that British soldiers came in, helped nourish him back to health. Basically like you would feed a baby, starting off with just, mushy cereals and things so that he could, build up his stomach again and get healthy. After that, the Jews of Europe, they were all displaced all over Europe, so word went around, go home. Just go home and see who will be there. So he eventually, after 4 weeks or so of getting his strength up, he went back to Prague, then to Budapest. He said, sleeping in a hallway at a displaced persons camp in Budapest when his brother Joe walked into the same place. So they were reunited there at the displaced persons camp in the same room. So then the two of them went back home, and when they took the train and got back to Tate, they found out that their older brother Sam was there. He had survived the war, along with 3 aunts who also were from Tate, who did go with them, through Auschwitz. Actually, one of them did. 2 of them went into hiding. But what they did was they just went out to the train station every day to see who was alive, who returned, who was coming back. But their home was taken over by other people. There really wasn't a whole lot to do there in Tate. It had been pretty much run down. And word went around that the Russians were going to close off access to the West. The Iron Curtain was going to come down, they weren't going to let people leave. So actually the same day they got word, they were told to pick up and leave, so they did. And they had a real harrowing tale of taking like horse and buggy and a boat across a river. And anyway, they did make it safely to Czechoslovakia, lived there for a period, then went to Germany. And in Germany, he found out, the Red Cross was taking care of them at this time, American Red Cross. And he found out that there was a youth program that was going to America. A lot of the Jewish people went to Israel, some went to America. So to get on the youth program, though, he had to be, I don't remember exactly what it was, maybe 17 instead of 18. So he lied about his age by 1 year. So in all his official documentation, to this date, he's actually a year older than his official records say. But he and his brother Joe were able to come out in that program. They lived in New York for a short time. They lived in Boyle Heights, an area in East LA, which is a very Jewish section of town. Another thing, the Russians, back when he was in H, another reason they didn't want to get out of there is because the Russians would come by and they'd want work done. Same thing. They'd start grabbing people, hey, you need to do this, dig trenches for us. Not what they wanted to do after the experience they went through, start slaving for the Russians. So in America, he was drafted into the U.S. Army, and he served for a couple of years. He was a sergeant during the Korean War, and they stationed him in Salzburg, Austria, which actually was really nice because he knew German language. They thought they'd put him to use in that area, so he actually didn't go to Korea. But he was a driver for some officers and had I guess, a pretty good time, he would say, when he was in the Army. Then came back to Los Angeles, got married, 3 kids, became a plumbing contractor, building contractor, and here he is today. One more interesting sidelight is that there's a book called The Auschwitz Album. Some of you may have seen the pictures. Ms. Williamson will show you that she put up. But what happened basically was, this is an amazing, really amazing story to our family because there was a woman who, when the camp was liberated, back at Auschwitz, she was too sick to go on the march, so they left her behind. And the Americans came into the camp. They basically put her into an officer's room with some blankets so that she could rest. And she happened to open up a drawer and find a series of pictures. There was about 150 pictures, and it showed a group of Jews that came into the camp and followed through. And the book was sectioned off with titles: Selection, the workforce, what happened to them, with titles. It was like going to be a book of the history of the Jews at the camp. And she looked through the book, and she discovered a photo of herself and of her entire community, which is really a miracle because, like I told you, 1 million people were murdered there. Trains were coming day after day after day. These were photographs taken of one transport on a train. And any picture that you see on television, in a movie, in a book, any picture that's taken from inside Auschwitz is from this book. There are no other pictures that exist. Nobody was allowed to take pictures. So only these photographs exist. Well, back in 1982, when I was in college, I read about this woman in a book that she found, told my dad about it, said, hey, let's go check out the book. Because the woman who found the book was also from an area right near Tate. She was a Hungarian Jew. Her transport was about the same time as my dad. Everything was almost exactly the same. So we went and we bought the book, and we flipped through it. To make a long story short, he's photographed in this book. His picture's in the book, in one of the photographs. A picture of himself with his brothers. You can see them lined up, waiting to move into the camp. There's another picture up against a train with his mother and his grandmother. And to us, these pictures are remarkable because of the people who did not survive. We had no photographs of them until 1982. And now we actually have pictures of them. And if you'll see the picture of my dad, that's it actually. And when he points it out, that's him right there. Very obviously him. know my dad and take a look at a picture of him.
Or if you know Ben.
And, you know, a lot of people think Ben looks like my dad. So, very special book, and my father and his brothers were able to identify well over 100 to 150 people in this book and give the information to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Israel that they use for identifications. So, very special book for us. If you run the one with the green tape in, the green box, for like 3 minutes and 20 seconds. We'll let my dad explain the pictures and who's who. And then we can open it up if we have time and take questions about anything that you're thinking of.
Went through all the names. Thank you. What about your fingers?
Those are Ben's older sisters.
I got that.
Before Ben was born.
It's a nice thing. Great.
That's it.
With the man and women, this here is my sister, my younger sister. This here is my